Welcome everyone, we're so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and joining us for another episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast with your hosts Steve Hodgson and Dr. Eric L. Davis. We ask that you please note that the information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. It is essential to consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any medical concerns, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, and any actions taken based on the information presented are at your own risk. We are so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and join us for a brand new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Let's watch what this evening's podcast is all about. In this evening's powerful episode, we take on one of the most challenging and misunderstood mental health disorders, schizophrenia. Tonight's episode is titled Schizophrenia, Breaking the Stigma, Understanding the Mind. Our host will explore what schizophrenia truly is, how it affects the brain, what causes it, and how it can be managed with care, support, and the right resources. Did you know? Approximately 24 million people globally, about 1 in 300, currently live with schizophrenia. In the United States, around 2.4 million adults have been diagnosed with schizophrenia. In Europe, approximately 5 million individuals are affected by psychotic disorders, including schizophrenia. Africa has 2.1 million, Central America 3.9 million, Southeast Asia 6.2 million, and Western Pacific 7.9 million. Schizophrenia accounts for about 1% of global disability-adjusted life years. An estimated 70–90% of affected individuals in low and middle-income countries do not receive adequate treatment. Overall, fewer than 1/3 of those affected globally get proper care. The peak onset is in late adolescence to early adulthood. Men, 20–28 years. Women, 26–32 years, with a second peak around menopause, 40–45 plus, even up to approximately 60. About 75% of people with schizophrenia develop it between ages 16–30. Childhood onset schizophrenia under 13 is rare, 0.04% prevalence. Schizophrenia is 1.4 times more frequent in men than women. Tonight your hosts will unpack early warning signs and symptoms, how schizophrenia is diagnosed and treated, the difference between fact and stigma, gender and age dynamics of the disorder, and most importantly, how recovery is possible. Schizophrenia doesn't define a person. This episode is about looking past the label and seeing the human being, the story, and the value that still exists. If you or someone you love has been affected by schizophrenia, this episode is for you. Here are your hosts.
Well, howdy, everyone, and welcome back to the Your Life Matters Show podcast. This is a place where we shine a light on the real, raw, and often overlooked aspects of mental health. I'm your co-host, Steve Hodgson, and I'm joined by our other co-host, psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis, who brings us a wealth of clinical knowledge, compassion, and years of experience walking alongside individuals and families facing this illness. So, Dr. Davis, it's great to be back for another episode.
Absolutely.
We're
I
actually
don't know,
going.
man. You were pretty complimentary. My head's growing. It might leave the screen. No,
Well,
I
I think I get you in a good mood before we start getting into the episode. It might help a little bit. But,
Yeah.
Today we're going to open the door to a conversation that's often stays locked behind doors, silence, stigma, misunderstanding. See, today we're going to focus on schizophrenia, which you already knew because you already saw the opening film, but a deeply misunderstood mental health condition that affects millions of people around the world, yet it remains one of the most stigmatized and feared conditions. The word itself triggers confusion, fear, even judgment. But what's underneath the label is far more human and far more hopeful than most people actually realize. Schizophrenia isn't about having a split personality. It's not about being violent or unpredictable. We got to thank Hollywood, I guess, for a lot of that stuff, too. It's a complex brain-based disorder with symptoms that range from hallucinations and delusions to emotional withdrawal, confusion, difficulties with thinking clearly. But behind every diagnosis, we got to always remember there's a person, there's a life, and like we say, a life that matters. Okay, we'll break down today what schizophrenia really is, how it affects the brain, what that science tells us, and most importantly, how people can live full and meaningful lives despite the diagnosis.
Let's be real, life can feel overwhelming. Sometimes we lose our direction. And in those moments, reaching out for help isn't weakness, it's strength. You know, one of the most powerful things we can do for our mental health is simply to stop and ask for help. We'll look no further. Let me tell you about Waypost Counseling in Indianapolis, Indiana. Waypost was co-founded by Dr. Eric L. Davis and licensed therapist Aaron Davis. They started Waypost Counseling in 2020 because they wanted to create more than just a therapy practice. They wanted a place that truly walks alongside people through life's hardest seasons. And they offer more than just individual therapy. They provide individual and couples therapy, problem gambling treatment, and consulting services as well. They work with adults navigating everything from ADHD to grief, addiction to life transitions. Every journey is different, but our goal is always the same: to help people pause, reflect, and realign with where they want to go. It's actually where their name, Waypost, comes from. A marker on the path, something to help guide your next steps. And for anyone listening who's been thinking, I don't know where to start, this might be the moment. Therapy doesn't have to be intimidating. At Waypost, you'll find honesty, warmth, and a practical approach to real change. They're here to help you find direction and walk with you every step of the way. Whether you are in Indiana or anywhere in the United States, help is just a phone call away. They treat clients in person or using video conferencing directly from your home. If you're ready to start that journey, visit waypostcounseling.com or call Dr. Eric L. Davis at 317-762-0904 or therapist Aaron Davis at 317-659-0179 and take the first step. Waypost Counseling is proudly certified by the Indiana FSSA Division of Mental Health and Addiction and the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Abuse. That's waypostcounseling.com. Your next chapter starts here.
So if you're joining us today, and maybe because someone you love is affected by it, or maybe you want to learn more about the condition, which we really ask people to learn more because you won't be as, I don't want to say ignorant, but you'll understand more when you meet someone. We're glad you're here and we're glad you decided to join us. Because talking about schizophrenia isn't just awareness. It's about empathy. It's about community. And it's about recognizing that every single life, including those touched by schizophrenia, still matters deeply. So now with all of that said, my nice little intro, I'm going to take a deep breath. We'll clear the fear and have an honest, compassionate conversation on this topic and the people behind it and what they truly deserve. So, Dr. Davis, let's get right to the core of it. What exactly is schizophrenia?
So schizophrenia is kind of seen as a combination of things, like a spectrum. So schizophrenia is a chronic and severe mental health disorder that affects how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. People with schizophrenia often experience psychosis. So psychosis can include hallucinations, both auditory and visual, so seeing or hearing things, delusions, disorganized thinking, or difficulties with emotional expression, motivation, and daily functioning. It's not the same. A lot of people think that schizophrenia is like a split personality. You know, it's not. It's a brain disorder that impacts perception and reality.
So, again, as I said, most of what we know about schizophrenia is what we see on TV or we see in the movies and stuff. And not saying that there aren't people affected that way, but it's not the main thing because people think, they're talking to a person inside of a room. I actually did some research. I was watching on YouTube the other night and looked up schizophrenia and real patient schizophrenia. I didn't want to hear the other shows. We were about to do one. I wanted more to see what a schizophrenic patient looked like. They have actually filmed, and it's actually a very interesting disorder for people. So let's let the people know, how is it different from other mental health disorders? Similar to like bipolar disorder or what they call that schizoaffective disorder.
All right. So bipolar disorder is primarily a mood disorder. So people cycle between depressed feelings and mania. It's basically what we used to call manic depressive disorder, but it's bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder can also have psychotic features. So it can be it can appear very much the same as schizophrenia symptom wise. Schizoaffective disorder is essentially a hybrid with both psychotic symptoms and a major mood component. So, the person would be depressed and also having psychotic symptoms. Okay. Schizophrenia, on the other hand, has psychosis at its core. It's the mood symptoms are less central and consistent. What I can tell you as far as like what schizophrenia looks like in someone, I had a client years ago and he had schizophrenia, and you would never have known in a million years just talking to him. And then one day, it was kind of out of the blue, he knocked on my door. I was working at a place where they lived for long term. Anyway, knocked on my office door and came in. He said, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Now somebody's been using my VA card." I was like, you're, so he was a veteran. And he said that somebody had snuck in his room and they took his VA ID to steal his benefits or something like that. And so then it was, well, what they look like. So I couldn't really tell. I could just see their outline, but I heard them and I knew what they were doing. And then the conversation progressed to where then he shut the door, like closed the door all the way and was like, "Now I've been part of a government conspiracy for," and then started that type of dialogue. And so at that point, I remember I reached out to a psychiatrist, and they modified his meds just a little bit. And within 2 days or something, it was regular again, so it's something that is very treatable, and people can live normal, productive lives, but it's a very real thing. And my heart breaks for folks that deal with it, honestly.
And I guess basically too, it's important they take their medicine, because
Absolutely,
if they don't take their medicine, they'll have more. It made me start to think about, half of the paranormal investigators schizophrenic. Okay, that hear voices and see shadows that aren't there, and
Yeah.
we might line up for that as well, but
Yeah.
in some occasions, But
One
yeah,
other thing, I'm so sorry. I know I'm cutting you off.
yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention, because I'll forget this, but something interesting on the topic of bipolar disorder is I've also encountered clients who, were dually diagnosed. They had bipolar disorder and substance use disorder, and they would go off of the bipolar medicine because the mania felt so wonderful. But the problem with bipolar disorder, you can't experience the mania without the fallout of the depression.
Mhm.
So they would go off the meds, and it was almost like a natural drug. Um, and that was so it was hard for them to give up the mania. I always found that really interesting. I asked one of the clients one time when he was extremely depressed that had bipolar disorder. I asked him, what does it feel like? And what he told me, I've always remembered this. I thought it was really insightful. He said, if you've ever had someone close to you pass away, he said, just that low, like grief, that constant grief, that heavy feeling. And he was like, and it kind of, you know, subsides over time, but it never fully goes away. And he was like, it's kind of like that. He was like, that's what the depression feels like. And I just thought that was really a really deep, insightful perspective.
I think we'll delve more into depression, because I think that's something that's too common, and
Yeah.
especially in our country. I've met people, I mean, I know so many people that are on depression medication,
I
and
think
for the
part of that
longest time,
probably has
remember,
to
they used to
do,
give it to everybody, the doctors.
yeah. I mean, we live in, our society as a culture, it's go, 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 go. And I mean, really, depression, a lot of times you see it as a result of somebody just doing way too much for way too long. And they just physically and emotionally break, you
Mhm.
know? So
So
it's interesting because it can be the body's defense mechanism also sometimes.
that's what I personally think it is myself.
Yeah.
But all right, so let's make sure we don't get too far off of the
Yes, sorry.
schizophrenia. That's okay. Um,
Absolutely.
what are the early warning signs that someone is, starting to get this disorder? I don't want to say it's coming down with something, but is starting to experience signs of schizophrenia.
So you would look for things like withdrawing socially from family or friends, declining performance at school or work, paranoia, being suspicious all the time, talking to oneself or responding to unseen stimuli, so basically communicating with things that aren't there in some way, shape, or form. And another thing that a lot of people overlook, but is very flat or even inappropriate emotions, to where someone may be, laughing hysterically when something's, horrendously not funny or something of that nature. Difficulty concentrating or following conversations or neglecting hygiene or self-care. So, um, subtle changes in thinking or behavior often show up before full symptoms appear. And that's what we call the prodromal phase.
So is schizophrenia something that's in our genes? Is it genetic, environmental, or is it both?
It's both. So having a first degree relative with schizophrenia increases the risk, but environmental stressors such as trauma, substance use, or complications during birth can also play a role. So it's, the jury's out, but the answer is both.
I mean, do they see a higher, you mentioned that it was a veteran. I mean, are veterans more prone to schizophrenia? Is that the kind of
Not
environment that,
not necessarily that I'm aware of. I mean, that'd be something interesting to look into. Um, I mean, even with heredity, schizophrenia is not caused by like bad parenting or character flaws or anything. It's an illness. Um, so I would be interested to see how like maybe post-traumatic stress symptoms play, coincide with schizophrenia and stuff. But I don't know offhand.
okay. It was just, you mentioned the, veteran. That's what
Yeah.
sparked that in my head. So how does it really affect the brain? And we try to keep, as simple as we can, so
So
we,
in
we don't
simple
lose
terms,
half the audience.
they'll simply put the brain communication system misfires. That's really what's happening. So think of it as like faulty wiring. Um, there's too much dopamine activity in some areas, leading to hallucinations or paranoias. In other area, it could be, areas like involved in motivation or planning, they may be underactive. So it really it's things are not the communication in the brain is not operating optimally. There's either too much in some parts and not enough in others. But what's fascinating, and that's when we were first talking, and I said we kind of look at schizophrenia as a spectrum. It's for that reason. And I've seen in the past, I remember seeing a lot of studies where they talked about basically schizophrenia just being a combination of other disorders. And that hasn't ever become official or anything like that, but it was a theory at one time that I thought was interesting.
So what about men and women? Is it any different for men than it is for women?
So, so yeah, men typically show symptoms earlier. So in men, it typically will set in their late teens or early 20s, and it's often more severe negative symptoms like emotional flatness or withdrawal. In women, they tend to have a later onset. So on average, later 20s to early 30s, and studies have found that women typically have better social functioning in response to treatment, which I think is interesting.
Well, it's almost like I started thinking men reach puberty and start dealing with women, and women have to deal with men, and they just, after a number of years, they just had enough. Like 9, 10 years, they start to go too. Because how many, when you're talking about um, the signs, the warning signs, take a look at half the people who have been married for years, walk around talking to themselves. They're not
Yeah.
schizophrenic. They just, it's
Yeah.
just from go back to our relationship episode where we had your wife Erin on, and you'll
Yeah.
understand that one a little more. So let's talk about schizophrenia and how we diagnose schizophrenia. I mean, how is it diagnosed?
So we would
And
diagnose it, or
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, how long does it usually take to figure out, yeah, he's schizophrenic?
So in using the DSM-5, it's, we do a clinical interview, get a history, observe, and then we look at symptoms on, throughout durations of time. We would look at the last 6 months, the last year, and basically think of it as kind of check boxes where it's, if this number of check boxes is here, then this is what the diagnosis would be. Something with schizophrenia that is interesting about the actual hallucinations that individuals experience is that most of what I have read suggests that more often than not, it is going to be either just strictly auditory hallucinations or strictly visual. So when you see the movie like A Beautiful Mind, where there's, a little girl who's walking around talking, they said that may be a little far-fetched, not that that couldn't happen, but it would typically be seeing or hearing, which I always thought that was really interesting.
You made me think of a story, the famous psychic medium Chip Coffey that's been on so many Paranormal State, and there's a current show he's on. Was at one of his gallery readings, and I had asked him a question, and he started talking about, we were talking about evil. That's what I asked him if they ever encountered anything evil on Paranormal State, and he said, gave us a little story about there was this girl who was seeing things and talking to something else that was there. And they were at a break, where they're all sitting around having a cup of coffee, and the little girl's standing there, and she's just staring into space. And, people drinking, they're talking to each other, but he kept seeing her not moving.
Yeah.
And, was like after a while, over there. And he says at one point, she just turned around, looked him square in the face and said, "Get out."
Oh,
In
man.
like a deep voice. He goes, I didn't have to be told twice. He said, I was out of there. But the reason I bring it up, I mean, could it be sometimes that there is something else going on that's not, science looks at, no, there is no such thing as the paranormal, really. So what if she is, or, a child is talking to a spirit or something and telling it to do different things? Would that be taken as schizophrenia?
I mean, I would imagine in some cases it, potentially could.
Mm-hmm.
My hope would be that diagnostically that we have enough criteria that would include other symptoms. So
Okay.
like mood, those different things. If it's just strictly hallucinations, it could, who knows what it is. But when we see that coupled with the different behavioral symptoms and all that, that's how we would know the difference.
Because I mean, I guess as a child, what I was thinking of, childs always have that imaginary friend.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that really has that, I guess we have to learn difference. Like you said, they have to check off a bunch of boxes, not just one.
Yeah.
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 Good.
And I mean, like with the client I was talking about, like, looking at diagnostically in his case, I mean, there were definitely other, things socially and different areas of his life that were definitely affected, even in addition to, what he would see or, and I think what happened is I think that he was one of his roommates was moving around and that woke him up. And then I think my theory anyway, and I have no
Mhm.
idea, but I think that he was the people moving around were the hallucination, and he coupled
Right.
that.
Yeah, and it triggered that on him. So what today is the most, I know science changes so often, but what's the most effective approach for treatment right now?
Well, so medication, antipsychotic medication, that really with schizophrenia, that remains the foundation of treatment and I think this is really important for people to understand with behavioral health. When it comes to brain chemistry, the biology of the brain, etc., I can affect that through, helping work along your neuroplasticity, but a doctor can affect that by giving you medicine to balance out what's chemically wrong. So the it's a two-part problem, where it's not something that just therapy alone can fix. It's not necessarily something always that medication alone can fix, but medication's the cornerstone. Psychosocial interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy, family therapy, supported employment, those, social skills training, all those things are important for the person's long-term functioning. And then there's also what they call assertive community treatment, or ACT, which is coordinated specialty care teams. And this is the gold standard model for comprehensive support. So really, I mean, I think ideally what the person would do, would be working with an ACT team that, has a psychiatrist, a therapist, everything that they need in a one-stop shop. That's really, it's community treatment.
Because it actually seems like they need someone to write a script. They need the medication as well as the therapy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but I think, this is as good as an episode as any to kind of we were talking about how with behavioral health symptoms, what breaks my heart is I'll have a client come to me and let's say they're just really depressed or whatever. And so I refer them to a physician. They get on, the physician prescribes medication. They start taking it. They come back, 2 weeks later, a week later, and they're like, I still feel awful. This medication isn't working. It's like, well, we don't know if it is yet or not. And so, especially with SSRIs, and I am not a medical doctor, so defer to your medical doctor on the specifics of that. I'm just simply stating an observation I've seen as a therapist. If you can make it through the trial period, so to speak, sometimes it takes that to find the right dose of the right medication and the right frequency. And, and obviously there are people there to support you through that, therapists or team members or whatever, but don't let that discourage you. Sometimes it does take a little bit of time to even really know if the medication's working at all.
Right, because it has to build up so much of it in your system before it starts working. I mean, that really is 90% of the medications you take are like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't think it's not working and stop, because it has to build up. And, same thing with, I think of insulin for a diabetic. Maybe at first it's not going to work, but that's very important not to miss a dose, because you need that constant amount of insulin in your system for you to react normally, during the day. So, I mean, yeah, that's probably really important for people to understand. So, but what about, we said medication. Is there a way, are there people that have been treated without medication? It's probably a better way to put it.
So yeah, I mean, medication is typically, in most cases, it's going to be necessary. And that's to manage the symptoms of, psychosis, prevent relapse into psychosis. But dosages and types can often be adjusted over time. And like the client I was talking about, he had reached a point for whatever reason, at that amount of time, that dose was not going to do it. So it was just a small modification, I remember. But some individuals with really mild symptoms may reach a point to where very minimal dosing of medication or even no medications needed. But that's pretty rare.
Right. So, we would most diseases, and like to talk about medical diseases, we're talking about believe it or not, colonoscopies. We were talking before we went on the air, but it wasn't here to there. We
Well, I
were
mean, we are both
relating.
middle.
Yes,
We're
we
both older
were
guys.
talking about a situation, okay, but it's not about colonoscopies itself. But the reason you're doing that is because early intervention. I mean, the earlier you catch, even with cancer, you better chances of survival. Does early intervention really help, or is it something that the illness goes untreated for too long that it goes out of control?
Early intervention is absolutely critical.
Okay.
Absolutely critical. The longer schizophrenia goes untreated, the more the brain adapts to that, disorganized state. So basically think of it as out of sight, out of mind, kind of like the further I get from, it's like working out or something. And this has happened numerous times in my life. Further I get from going to the gym, it's like my reality, the gym becomes not part of my reality anymore. And so early intervention is important because it can help reduce symptoms, prevent long-term disability, or improve long-term outcomes. There's never a better time to treat a problem than this minute, ever.
See, I'm one of those people at the gym myself. That's why you were looking down when I had my hand up.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's me. I've never been a gym person, though I know the benefits of going. But the first time we ever went to was Anytime Fitness in Greensburg, and we had a trainer that actually we paid for a trainer to work with us, and he gave me a whole bunch of exercises we were doing and stuff. And by the time we finished, I remember it felt like a 3.5 mile walk to the car, which was just outside the front door in the parking lot there, because my legs were just like rubber. But I mean, I literally had no feeling in my body other than pain, okay, in places that I never knew I had pain. So, yeah, when you get out of that for a while, it really affects your body and your mind. And I think that's another mental thing. I think we just say, well, we don't need to go. We don't need to put ourselves through that anymore. Okay, just push it off to the side, forget about it, and we'll never remember it happened. So, back to this. So let me ask you, are there any promising new treatments or research, developments that give better hope for better care in the future for patients suffering from schizophrenia?
Yeah, very much so. So in recent times, we're seeing, digital tools like apps, injectable medications, so a person doesn't have to worry about, taking a pill, et cetera. Therapy. Something I'm really interested in that they're starting to explore very cautiously is psychedelic research. So seeing, what are the effects of, psilocybin, or other neuroinflammatory things. And then also there has been research on glutamate and non-dopamine pathways in the brain that may be better targeted for meds in the future. So they're making headway on things. It's just, it's a big task.
I find it interesting that you talked about that, because some of the effects of some of the things that you're talking about that people were taking were to get that way, where you maybe start seeing things. So it's interesting that treatment is actually going in that direction.
Yeah. It could. I mean, it's very, very cautiously. I mean, it's being studied. But I'm who knows? That's who my theory is always, I've been doing this for a long time, and if something works, who am I to judge? It's like,
exactly. Mm-hmm.
So if it can help somebody, awesome. My only concern is that it's done ethically and safely, etc.
Well, I think even the app stuff you were talking about is great too, because more and more today with technology, we talked about with the sleep show we did, that I don't even go in to see my sleep doctor anymore. I do stuff, telemedicine, I think they call it now. And I guess really with what you're doing, as a therapist, you can do a lot of that as well.
I do quite a bit
can
of
do it
telehealth
from sitting in their home. Yeah. And Plus, you have today, I keep thinking of poor Dr. Phil, too many years of watching his show. Uh, where they have that dial-a-doc or whatever it is that,
Yeah.
they can call up and get help like right there over the telephone if they need to and speak to a professional at that point. So yeah, I guess things are changing. So I want to talk about some of the misconceptions and the myths of schizophrenia. Okay, split personality. Okay, it's a frequent misunderstanding. Schizophrenia does not involve a split or multiple personality. That's a condition called dissociative identity disorder.
Yes.
They call that DID, by the way.
It's- well, DID usually. And like
Yeah,
if
okay.
we're that's typically what I've heard is like, well, DID. So
Okay,
yeah.
because you don't want somebody who did something. So, and violence, which is the other misconception. People with schizophrenia are not really inherently violent. While
No.
some individuals may experience heightened aggression, it's not a defining characteristic of the illness. It's often linked to other factors like substance abuse and lack of treatment. And that's probably a good question that I just had right now, and I don't even know if it's coming later.
It's okay.
But do schizophrenia, people suffering from schizophrenia, do they intermix a lot with substance abuse?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, what I've seen most often is alcohol. It and I think a lot of that has to do with, obviously there's alcoholism, but I think that they're also probably trying to treat some of the symptoms on their own, which definitely would exacerbate things. But I've seen a really high correlation of substance use and schizophrenia.
And I was going to say that it would only exacerbate the problems by taking
Yeah.
drugs or alcohol. That's just going to make it worse. It's not going to help it.
Yeah.
It's just going to make it worse. But I guess they feel, maybe I'm not aware or don't care when I'm high that I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Like we did the
Yeah.
show on cannabis last week. Wow, man.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was talking to myself. That's interesting. It's,
Yeah.
but okay. Some of the other things are inability to function. Many individuals with schizophrenia can do and lead normal, productive lives. With proper treatment and support, they can hold jobs, attend school, and maintain relationships.
Yeah.
Because I think people think if you had schizophrenia, you're put in a straitjacket and put into an
Yeah.
asylum someplace.
That's not the case. I mean, honestly, that is not the case at all. More often than not, if you're interacting with someone that has schizophrenia, unless they're in the middle of some sort of an episode, you would never have any idea,
Mhm.
unless there were outward symptoms, which there typically won't be, if it's just somebody that you interact with now and then. But things are treatable. I hate the stigma that's around it because of how it's been portrayed, because it is a very, it's not, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, just like any other, mental illness or anything, but it is very treatable. And you can, like, your life does not end at schizophrenia. It can go on and you can have a happy, productive, wonderful life. It's just,
And
we
another
just
thing,
have to
it's not
address it.
from bad parenting. That's
No.
another misconception. It wasn't that you were brought up a certain way. It's a complex mental health condition with biological and environmental factors, which we just talked about, which contribute to its development, not from having bad parents. Um, Not every one of them have all the same symptoms. That's another thing. Some people might, talk to someone that's there. Some people might see things. Some people might hallucinate. That there are different. There's no single uniform set of symptoms. Is basically what we're saying. That's why you said there's like a spectrum of
Yeah.
things that they're checking off. And
And there's a
the
very
last
big
one,
difference. We were talking about there would be a very big difference between someone who's on the very low end of that spectrum, of schizophrenia and has much milder symptoms than, I mean, it's just a very, it's an array of things.
exactly.
It really is one of the most, and I say this with, the utmost respect as a clinician. It's a really interesting, I mean, it really is one of the most interesting behavioral health disorders to learn about, because it is so, it's kind of a chameleon. It looks so different so many times.
And he's basically saying that from the educational side of his job. Okay, not that, hey, let's bring in another
Right.
schizophrenic
Yeah.
or something. Yeah. So yeah, I get that. And the last myth I want to talk about is incurable. While schizophrenia is a long-term condition, like we've talked about, it is treatable.
Yes.
Combination of medicine, therapy, and supportive services, individuals can manage their symptoms and live really fulfilling lives. As
Yeah.
long as they stay on their meds and, maybe even talk to a supportive group now and then, they can live normally. So let me ask you, so what advice would you give to someone, to a family member? In other words, if I suddenly found out that my wife was schizophrenic, what advice would you give to me of how I'm going to have to deal with her, and the schizophrenia?
The first thing I would recommend would be to educate yourself on the condition. Seriously, go online, learn everything you can about it. Look at what the symptoms are, all that. So learn everything you can about it. The next thing is, offer connection, not correction. If someone is in an episode or something, don't try to like logic them out of it. It's, be supportive and be connected, not corrective. Um, all the other thing is to set realistic expectations. Depending on what you're dealing with, sometimes we may have to modify our expectations of someone a little bit, and that's okay. You know, um, and then the last thing I would say, like, find support for you as a family member. There's tons of groups out there. There's NAMI, the National Association on Mental Illness, like Family to Family. There's other support groups like for addiction. There's PALS, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, or Al-Anon, but definitely find some support. The most valuable information out there is not even professional information for a family member. Like, that's important. I don't want to undermine what I'm saying. Like, I'm important too. Okay. But seriously, the best support that you can get is to find others who have experienced the same types of things as yourself. If you look hard enough, you may find a support group specific to family members who are dealing with a loved one that's struggling with schizophrenia. And, it's, I can't stress that enough. Support groups are wonderful. I mean, they are so powerful, and the help and the support you can get there is like no other. And I'm saying that as a person in recovery, like that. I have I'm a therapist. I have a therapist. I've seen therapists, and the best, what saved my life truly was the support of people that were dealing with the same issues that I was. I can't stress that
And
enough.
we'll
Okay,
put
I'll get off
links
my
in.
soapbox.
We'll put links in the description too. So go to
Yeah.
description links. We'll have links for people who are suffering from schizophrenia, and also supportive groups. And it's interesting because the last incarnation, so to speak, of the Your Life Matters show, when I was misdiagnosed as having IPF, we did a show with myself. There was another gentleman, good friend of mine, who has IPF from Indiana. And then we had Jen come on to the show, my wife. And we also had this other gentleman whose father was suffering from IPF. And we had a good open discussion about IPF in general.
Yeah.
And the support stuff that you learn from hearing another person who's going through some of the same issues that you're going through, as far as the family side is concerned.
Yeah.
One gentleman was dealing with his dad, who just was not one that wanted to wear oxygen. Let's say that, and that was one of the things the gentleman brought up. But he would go out and play golf, and midway through playing golf, he'd almost collapse on the golf course because
Oh,
he refused to be wearing oxygen. Look, I got it on, folks.
yeah.
You wear it, and there's no stigma behind it. But those were the kind of things that, how do you deal with someone who doesn't want to do that? It's one thing hearing it from you, a therapist, how to
Right.
deal with it, or a doctor in most of those cases, but it's better to hear too from someone who's dealt with it before.
Yeah.
That's had that problem.
Well, the
So
thing, I was just talking to a client earlier today, and we were talking about, where do I find my support? And the reason that that's important is because I was telling him, as a person in recovery, if I called my wife every time I was struggling in my head, her phone would burst into flames. It would
mhm,
literally burst into flames, and it would scare her to death. And so when that's part of the benefit of that is I can it's a way to spare her from what I'm dealing with is by having support outside of the family. I mean, she's supportive 100%, but I need support for me also. What if something happens and I can't go to her for support? So
right.
I need to have that support constantly. The other thing I love about people who are peers, they can also tell you all the things that didn't work. They
Exactly.
could save you a
Yes.
lot of grief by saying, well, I tried this, it didn't work, and this didn't work, but
I
these
thought
things,
just tying his hands to the chair so he couldn't get up for an hour
yeah,
would take
yeah.
care of the problem. That
If
urge
only it
would
were that
pass.
easy.
Okay. Yeah. But it's also good for your spouse or other half to know that
Yeah,
you still are struggling. But like you say, it
absolutely.
doesn't have to be every single time, but let them understand you are struggling with it.
Yeah. And it's all
I
it's there's no shame in it because this
no.
is, if you are experiencing, let's use schizophrenia as an example. If you are experiencing symptoms that look like they might be schizophrenia, you know, it's not the end of the world. Worst case scenario, you have to treat it. But that's the worst case scenario. Well, actually, the worst case scenario is you don't address it at all,
Mhm.
but there's never a better time. I just hope anyone listening will do themselves a favor. And if they're considering getting help, just make the call today. Just do it. I'm challenging you.
Exactly. And what? Well, that's great for those people. What could society in general do to better support people that live with schizophrenia?
Something that I have seen. So first of all, fighting the stigma, we need a lot more transparency. I am really excited to see individuals that have schizophrenia, like having YouTube channels and things like that, where they talk about their experiences and they explain what it feels like. And you can't. I mean, that's priceless information. I mean, think of it that way. That is priceless because the only way that those individuals know what it's like is going through it, and and they can tell you what it's like to give us a better understanding. I'm also glad to see um, that slowly but surely we're putting a new face on it where the age-old Hollywood depiction of schizophrenia is not the case at all. You can see video after video. These are normal folks who have lives, they have families, they work jobs, they're just regular people, but they have this behavioral health condition that they are dealing with. And that's really, the behavioral health condition can be a large part or small part of your life, depending on how early and how intensely you treat it.
See, I can understand why Hollywood plays it up, okay, because they want people to
Absolutely.
watch. But mainstream media, I mean, why has schizophrenia been left out of that conversation for so many years?
That's a good question, and I don't know. I mean, I think personally, um, maybe because it's not as common necessarily as others. I mean, it just isn't as prevalent. I mean, it's lots of people are afflicted, but maybe that's a reason. But also, I think it's the lack of understanding. It's always, like who wants to talk about something you don't understand, or maybe it's not exciting or blood and guts enough for media. I don't know. You know,
You see, it's the same way I've had a conversation with someone who I hadn't talked to in years the other day on the phone. And I was telling them about the show. And they're like, well, why would that interest you? Meaning to me. Okay,
Yeah.
why I'd be interested in that? It's because, number one, for myself, I like to learn about different things that are out there in the world, but it also helps me become a better person because I can recognize and understand what
Yeah.
someone's going through and be a lot more compassionate to it than just, get out of my way type of
Yeah.
thing. Because I think a lot of people, you say it's the ignorance of not knowing what it is. And, we really have to try to reduce that stigma, be more compassionate to people
Yeah.
than we've been in the past.
I mean, think about this. What if there, like, here's something just for anybody listening. What if there was a huge stigma about taking your car to the mechanic?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about that. Like, okay, I'm not a mechanic. I have an uncle that is, but I'm not a mechanic. So if I want to drive, I'm going to have to go to a mechanic sometimes. But if there's stigma, if, oh no, people might see my car there, they're going to, oh, he can't take care of his car good enough. It's like, all that stigma, we start kind of making this narrative. The reality is, no one has to know. If you're struggling and you need help, no one even has to know. Reach out to a professional. It's completely confidential. They will not tell a soul, and they'll do everything they can to help you.
Which, just on a side note, his uncle is a really good mechanic. I've gone to
Yeah, he is.
a number of
He
times
is.
too.
But I mean,
Yes, what on?
I think a lot of times we overlook stigma for those reasons. And it's not all the media's fault. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the media is responsible. No, we all have a hand in it. And really, it's just a lack of understanding. And a lack of understanding typically leads to a lack of empathy.
I mean, I think we get a lot of our knowledge after going to school, obviously, from media.
Yeah.
From movies and and if being shown all the time is that person that spins around in circles talking to themselves, that's what people, that becomes the face of schizophrenia in
Yeah.
most people's minds.
Yeah.
And,
And it doesn't have to
luckily,
be. It can be, but it does not have to be.
well, I think a lot of it is more accountability on the media's part and
Yeah.
more conversations, like you say, like this, or the person that goes on that is a schizophrenic that goes
Mhm.
on and does their own podcast.
Yeah.
Jen
I mean,
told me
honestly, one of the
numerous
best
times.
things, like John Nash,
Right.
the movie A Beautiful Mind's about, that is
Hmm.
some of the best, um, regardless of how it's depicted, at least we're talking about this. At least at least it's part of the dialogue. And I think that's part of the thing, or part of what prevents it too, is people are afraid to talk about it because of that stigma. So if we're afraid to talk about it, imagine somebody afraid to say, "Hey, I'm dealing with this." You
Right.
know, it's we shouldn't be so afraid to talk about things as a society and have logical discourse and try and gain some understanding of the world, you know?
A long time ago, before I decided, contact you and we do this show, Janet said I should be doing like a daily vlog
Mhm.
of living with restrictive lung disease and what that's like on a daily basis. And first the idea was interesting, but then I was like, but there really isn't anything that I put on, a cannula, and that's it. And yeah, okay, limits me getting around. But then I do go out and I see support groups on Facebook and different areas
Yeah.
where people are dealing with, they got a really hard time from a manager of some place because they're wearing oxygen.
Hmm.
I mean, I know myself when I have gone to the gym, okay, which I still belong to Planet Fitness, and I still go. But people give me a very strange look when I walk in carrying an oxygen tank
Hmm.
on my shoulder,
Yeah.
or sometimes I even wheel in the thing so this way it will stand there on its own when I'm like, on a
Yeah.
treadmill or something.
Absolutely.
But you see the looks. They
Mhm.
may not be staring at you, but you
Yeah.
see that glance out of the side of their eye that they're watching you. And I can understand how some people it makes you feel uncomfortable. And that's the kind of compassion we're talking about. Is
Right.
this, you should be looking at that and saying, wow, God bless this guy.
Yeah.
He's on oxygen, whatever kind of lung disease he's got. Look at it. He's
And
wants to keep
he's
living.
still making it in here and doing what he
Hmm.
can. I mean, there's no shame in that. I wish people could understand that, if you need help with something, sometimes that is all the difference in the world.
Right.
But imagine it. But imagine Steve, like what if you wouldn't go in? It's like, well, they might look at my oxygen tank, or, it's like, well, then that only harms you.
Right.
That only harms you, and it harms them of, friendship with an awesome person, or, I mean, it's the stigma. We've got to fight the stigma.
So you got to remember, I'm a former New Yorker. Okay, it doesn't bother me at all. Okay.
Oh, no.
What,
Well, it's
what,
true.
what are you looking at? Or would you like me to swing the stake across your head? Okay. If you bother me, that person's still there someplace, way suppressed, way deep
Very
in my
deep
back.
down.
Yes. Okay, I want to ask two last questions.
Okay.
Okay. How can people advocate for themselves if they're worried about mental health but are afraid to speak up? What should they do?
So start small. Talk about it to your best friend. Talk to somebody that you trust. It doesn't have to be, hey, everybody, check this out. It can be, but talk to somebody. So start small. Another thing, you can go online. There's different screening tools that you can use. My only suggestion, I'm going to say that I'm going to put my therapist hat on really good for a minute. Make sure that it is evidence-based. Make sure it is an empirically based, evidence-based screening tool, because that will ensure that it's screening for what it's supposed to, the way it's supposed to. Don't just get Billy Bob's, hey, am I depressed? Quiz on jot form. Get a empirically based, okay, evidence-based. Then the last thing would be, to remember that seeking help is not weakness. Like we're talking about, it's strength, it's self-respect, it's accountability. There's nothing bad about that. It's just weird that, and I'm guilty too. I'm a person like everybody else. I internalize asking for help as weakness too in my mind, even though I know better, but it still feels that way sometimes. Luckily for me, I have been able to improve my life by simply accepting the help that I asked for. I mean,
And
really,
you're
if it comes
surrounded
down
by
to I'm not
people,
special.
but
Yeah.
you're also surrounded by people you can trust that are not
Yes.
going to be judgmental and are going to be there to help.
Yeah. And that's on me too. I mean, that's something too, where
Mhm.
I am responsible for who's in my circle. I'm responsible for if people know what's going on with me or not. I'm responsible for if people know that I'm struggling or not, or am I okay?
Mhm.
If you have great people around you, they'll always keep an eye and try and have your back and make sure you're okay. But a lot of times just simply getting it out and saying, I need help to someone can be a game changer.
So the last question I'm going to ask, is there a spiritual, emotional, or human lesson we can learn from understanding schizophrenia better?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the spiritual lesson in it is we're all the same. I mean, we all know that life, to some degrees, it's the luck of the draw, I mean, and um, if anyone out there is like me, I look at quote unquote regular people, you know, and I beat myself up because I've never been a regular person. I'm a person that has been diagnosed with substance use disorder, attention deficit, uh, anxiety, lots of different things. But in spite of that, and that's the resilience, like there is no weakness. It's what do big companies do when when an area of their business is failing? They bring in consultants, they bring in experts, and that can make all the difference in the world if they get a good one, you know. But start with people that you trust implicitly. Tell them what's going on. Ask them what they would do. Ask them if they'll support you in whatever decision you make.
You got to remember
We
you're
don't have to do it
unique.
alone.
That's how you have to look at it. Each person is unique
Absolutely.
in their own
Yeah.
way. So if we, we always look at myself with the oxygen. Sometimes I catch myself feeling sorry for myself, and I just say, "Gee, I wish I was like them." But
Yeah.
they have a whole bunch of other issues
Yeah.
that I don't have.
Yeah,
So
we call
we're all
that
unique. Deal with what we have.
judging our insides by everyone else's outsides.
Right.
And that's the thing too with social media and all that. I mean, don't believe everything you see all the time.
Hmm.
People are always going to present their best face. I mean, that's just human nature. But what I can tell you as a therapist for many, many years, people from all walks of life are dealing with things, and no one is alone in having problems. We're all having problems, It's just a
I
matter
take that.
of am I outward about it? Do I talk about it or not?
I take that. Don't believe everything. I use that for politics. Just every time I read a political story or see a news story, that's just say that same thing to you. So, if there's one takeaway from today's episode, it's that schizophrenia may change how someone experiences the world, but it doesn't take away their worth.
Not
It
at all.
doesn't erase their dreams, their potential, or their place in communities. And we've learned recovery is possible. Support is probably the most essential, and compassion is non negotiable. We encourage all of you to keep this conversation going in your homes, with your friends, in your workplace, and online. Say, yeah, I was watching this really interesting podcast the other night. And they were talking about schizophrenia.
They're
Okay.
like,
And wow,
apparently, and they said, apparently you have to have a beard and be bald to host it.
that's and wear glasses. I guess I can put my glasses on.
Yeah.
They're sitting here too, but it was that ring light. That's all you would see inside my glasses. But we do need to talk more to break that silence. And the more we break the silence, the more lives we can uplift, protect, and even save. So if you or someone is struggling with symptoms of schizophrenia or any other mental health condition, don't wait. You'll just reach out for help because the help is out there. It's
Yes, it
available
is.
everywhere, even online. Okay. And as I said, we're going to have some links in the description. And again, remember, there's always hope. So I want to thank you all for joining us today for another compelling episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. For this really important and powerful discussion about schizophrenia. A big thank you, as always, Dr. Eric Davis here, for breaking down the complexity of the condition with clarity and compassion, and for helping us understand that behind every diagnosis is a story, a person deserving of dignity, love, and support. Now, remember, folks, don't forget to like and subscribe and share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. It only takes a minute and truly, truly helps the channel. When you're BSing with some of your friends, and they say, what do you watch? Say, I watch the show every week. It takes an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, depending on if there's guests. And, they talk about some interesting topics. We're up at recording of the show. We're up to over like 3,500 subscribers right now.
Man, that's
So
awesome.
that's,
Let's make it
fantastic.
4,000.
Yeah. So people are watching more, and they're getting involved in it. And the shows are so diverse that we have a show for everybody. We really don't have anyone out.
And if there's a show that you'd like to see, let us know.
Yep.
We love doing this. We love doing
And in
this.
fact, next week we planning on a show on laughter. We're going to lighten up a little bit, and if everything goes right, we even have a national comedian who will be joining us too for about a 15-20 minute segment, who is really going to help that topic. Remember, visit our website at yourlifemattershowpodcast.com for more information about the show, and you can contact us there if you need to. And we truly both hope you'll join us next week as we continue exploring the stories and strategies that help us live with more purpose, clarity, and compassion. Now, remember, on this podcast, we don't just talk about mental health. We celebrate the strength that it takes to face, because your story matters, your struggle matters, and above all, your life matters. So until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and remember, never forget that your life matters. God bless you all, and we hope to see you next week. Okay, we stop that. What's actually funny?
Thank you for joining us for this week's new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week for another great episode with your host Steve Hodgson and psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis. Please remember to subscribe to our channel if you have not already done so, and hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode. Your help with this helps us reach a wider audience that may need our help. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you are valuable and important. Take time to cherish yourself and those around you. Never forget, your life matters.